Well, hello there, my dears. I'm Margaret, 72 years young, full of sass, spice, and at least mild sunburn. I'm allergic to sunscreen. I overpack for every trip. And I have an uncanny talent for turning a relaxing vacation into international confusion. This story. Oh, this one's a doozy. They said, Margaret, take a break. Go see the pyramids. You deserve it. And I thought, why not? I'd been good. I hadn't caused a scene at bingo night for at least 3 weeks. So I booked myself a nice little group tour to Egypt. History, sunshine, pyramids. What could possibly go wrong? Spoiler alert. Everything. It all began on a Tuesday. I remember because my suitcase broke a wheel in the Cairo airport and I had to drag it like a sled across the terminal, grumbling all the way. I wore my sensible sandals, wide-brimmed hat, and of course, bright red lipstick. A lady should never travel without lipstick. It's the only thing between you and total despair. Anyway, we were staying at this hotel that looked very authentic in the brochure. But in person, I'm fairly certain it had been built sometime last week out of cement, hope, and at least one IKEA shelf. Still, I wasn't going to complain. I had my mini fan, my binoculars, and a travel-sized bottle of gin that I kept discreetly in my purse. Like a lady. Day 1 sightseeing. Camels. Tour guides. Sand. Oh, so much sand. I had sand in places I didn't know could hold sand. And yet, I was having a grand time. Then came the moment. The moment where destiny peeked around the corner and whispered, Hey Margaret, want to make your life interesting? And I, being the curious sort, said, All right then. Let me set the scene. We were at this big market near the base of the pyramids, tourists everywhere, spice stands, souvenir stalls, and camels. Camels just sort of standing around, looking simultaneously majestic and annoyed. I felt a kinship with them, honestly. That's when I saw him. A man in a red. Let me begin this chapter with a public service announcement. Never ever say yes to a camel unless you're absolutely sure it's yours. Because sometimes, mind you, you might climb aboard a lovely creature, pat it kindly on the neck, and discover 20 minutes later that you're wanted for unauthorized camel usage in northern Africa. So, there I was. Still in Egypt, still flustered from the souk incident, or as I call it, the Great Papyrus debacle, when I stepped outside into the blinding sun, holding what I thought was a receipt for hummus, but turned out to be the claim ticket for someone else's camel. Now don't ask me how I ended up at a camel rental stand. I'd followed a woman in a hat shaped like a fruit basket, thought she was my tour guide. Turned out she was a Russian influencer named Svetlana who didn't speak a lick of English and was vlogging about skincare in the desert. Naturally, I got distracted. The camel, meanwhile, was tied nearby, nibbling at something that may or may not have been a sock. I looked at the claim tag. I looked at the camel. The man running the rental waved at me and shouted something in Arabic that sounded suspiciously like, Come on, lady, she's all saddled up for you. Did I argue? No. Because at 72, I've learned 3 things. Don't waste time doubting yourself. Always accept a spontaneous adventure. And if you ever get the chance to ride a camel named Dorothy, you take it. Yes, I named her. She looked like a Dorothy. Now, getting on the camel was a full-body experience. It involved a ladder, a very enthusiastic shove from the rental man, and me shrieking, I'm too young to die like this, in a high-pitched wail that startled a nearby falcon. But once I was up, oh darling, it felt majestic. Like I was the queen of the Sahara. Or at least, queen of confused tourists in sensible sandals. We trotted. Well, Dorothy trotted. I wobbled. And then, as fate would have it, Dorothy took a wrong turn. Or perhaps it was the right turn, depending on how you feel about accidental gate crashing. Because she veered off the designated tourist camel path, yes, it's real, and wandered down a narrow alley into a bustling courtyard where a wedding procession was in full swing. A real wedding, drums, flutes, veils, men dancing with swords, women clapping, someone throwing flower petals. It was absolutely beautiful until they saw me. And let me tell you, nothing stops a wedding like a British grandmother on a rogue camel bursting through the veil of tradition like the ghost. I tried to apologize. I really did. But all I managed was a strained smile and a panicked, so sorry. Just passing through. Lovely dress. The bride's grandmother fainted. The groom laughed. The camel sneezed. Then someone, I kid you not, handed me a bouquet. I was mistaken for a guest of honor. Apparently, in Egyptian weddings, the arrival of unexpected guests can be a good omen. Or maybe they thought I was some eccentric aunt from overseas. Either way, people started cheering. Children threw flower petals at me. A man with a microphone yelled, "Habibti Margaret! Welcome to the celebration." How they knew my name, I will never understand. I smiled. I waved. I did the royal hand thing I once saw Queen Elizabeth do. I don't think I've ever felt so glamorous in all my life, except once in 1983 when I accidentally won a wet t-shirt contest in Marbella, but that's a tale for another day. Then it happened. Someone handed me a tambourine. Now listen. I may be 72, but once I have a tambourine in my hands, it's over for everyone else on the dance floor. Dorothy started swaying. I started jingling. The crowd went wild. A man threw money. A woman sobbed into her veil. Was I stealing the spotlight? Perhaps. Did I feel bad? Not even a little. But just when things were reaching peak fabulousness, a very tall, very serious-looking man in a beige suit stepped out of the shadows and shouted, "She has the documents." Everything went silent. Like movie-style silent. One of the drummers dropped his stick. "The what?" I said. "The documents," he shouted again. "In the saddlebag." I blinked. My handbag was still on my shoulder. But sure enough, tucked into the saddle on Dorothy's left side, was a leather pouch I had not noticed before. So I did what any self-respecting British woman does in a crisis. I lied. I raised one eyebrow and said, "I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to say what's in the bag." This apparently was the correct answer. Because he stepped back and whispered something into a walkie-talkie. 3 men in sunglasses appeared out of nowhere, flanking me like I was the president of Cameland. They didn't question me. They escorted me. Dorothy plodded along as if this was her daily routine, which honestly it might have been. I was taken to a shaded rooftop cafe, sat down at a mosaic table with a view of the Nile, and offered mint tea, dates, and something that might have been baklava or possibly a delicious legal form of paper. The tall man introduced himself as Naveed, and he said one sentence that changed everything. "We've been waiting for you." At this point, I gave up trying to make sense of anything. I just nodded, sipped my tea, and said, "Of course you have. Wouldn't want to keep international affairs waiting, would we?" Naveed looked deeply impressed. "You're cooler than I expected." "Everyone says that," I replied. "Until I beat them at poker." We talked in code, or rather, he thought we were talking in code, and I just said vaguely spy-sounding things like, "The desert speaks to those who listen. Time is a flat tire on the road of fate." We never discussed the zebra incident. I was winging it, darling, but with style. Then he pulled out a photo, an old black and white snapshot of a man in a fez holding what looked like a golden pineapple. Naveed asked, "Do you know what this means?" "Obviously," I said. "It means I'm in much deeper than I thought." He nodded solemnly. "You must protect the map," he said. "What map?" I asked, and that's when he reached down and pulled a folded piece of parchment from my camel saddle pouch. The same pouch I hadn't dared open earlier. It had markings, symbols, and one glorious red X. I tried not to laugh. This was either a spy mission, or someone had mistaken me for a contestant on The Amazing Race. Retirement Edition. I looked Naveed in the eye and said, "I'll get it to the destination. You have my word as a grandmother." He stood up, fist over heart. "Then may the desert protect you." Dorothy and I rode off, slightly less elegantly this time as I nearly lost a sandal, and just as we turned a corner, I whispered to her, "If we survive this, I'm buying you 2 buckets of dates and a foot massage." Dorothy made a grunting noise. I think it was approval. Eventually, Dorothy and I lumbered our way through the dusty alleys until the crowd thickened, and I saw the colorful chaos of the market ahead. Fabrics, fruit, shouting vendors, it was the exact kind of vibrant mess I adored. And more importantly, it was where I last saw my tour group, hopefully still oblivious to my accidental detour into Grand Theft Camel. I decided this was a good place to park. Now, if you've never parked a camel before, it's remarkably similar to parking a very large, slightly opinionated van with legs. I gave Dorothy a gentle pat and guided her toward a quiet spot just off the main path, next to a stand selling suspiciously shiny sunglasses in what might have been pickled snakes. "Stay here, darling," I whispered. "Act like you belong." Dorothy blinked slowly. I took that as understanding. Then came the tricky part, getting off the beast. One foot out of the saddle, the other trying to find ground that was definitely several feet too far down, and my knee sounding like bubble wrap, I froze mid-dismount, halfway between majestic and medical emergency. So I did what any resourceful grandmother would do in a foreign country with a stolen camel and a fading sense of balance. I waved down the nearest human. You there? Yes, with the juice cart. Could you lend a hand to a temporarily stranded lady? The poor boy, a teenager with one AirPod in and the look of someone reconsidering all his life choices, blinked at me as if I were a hallucination. I need a graceful exit, I explained. Well, semi-graceful. Preferably without a hip replacement. He approached cautiously. You want me to help you off the camel? Exactly. Think of it as a rescue mission. Very heroic. You can tell your friends later. With some awkward tugging, a solid amount of grunting from both of us, and a maneuver I can only describe as controlled sliding, I finally landed on the ground, upright mostly. Much obliged, I said, straightening my shirt and patting Dorothy's side with affection. Next time I'm bringing a step stool. The boy walked off in silence, muttering something I chose to interpret as admiration. I took a deep breath, smoothed my windblown hair, and turned to face the market. Little did I know the adventure was far from over. I dusted off my pants, looked around, and realized something unsettling. I had no idea where I was. I was near a market, yes. But not the market our guide took us to that morning. This was a different market entirely. No clean signs or labeled stalls. Just noise, smells, and at least 4 cats giving me the side eye. I started walking, determined to act casual, like a woman who knew exactly where she was going, which is my default state, by the way, even when I'm horribly lost. I passed a man selling pyramids made of glitter and sadness. Another tried to sell me a bottle of authentic Cleopatra sand, which I'm 90% sure was just cat litter in a jar. I smiled politely and said, no, thank you, I already have sand at home. Somewhere between a spice stall and a cart selling dates the size of ping-pong balls, I heard it. Margaret. Oh no. It was Dorothy's original owner. There he was, that sleepy man with his eyebrows furrowed and his sandals slapping the stone street like thunderclaps. He looked at me. Then he looked at Dorothy. Then he looked back at me. I did what any noble British grandmother would do in that situation. I pretended I didn't speak English. Pardon? Je parle pas, camel? I said in a questionable French accent. He didn't buy it. He marched over and started pointing at Dorothy, then at his own chest, then at me, saying something very passionate in Arabic which I didn't understand but I felt in my soul. So I panicked. I opened my purse, grabbed a few bills, I think one was a Canadian 5, the other a coupon for muffins, and shoved them into his hand with a cheerful, lovely camel. Thank you so much. Here, a tip for excellent service. Then I saluted, yes, saluted, and walked off like I'd just paid for valet parking instead of international camel theft. By some miracle it worked. He blinked, stared at the money, then at Dorothy, then just shrugged. And I power walked out of that market like a woman with strong opinions and weak knees. Eventually, I found a shady cafe where the rest of my tour group was lounging, blissfully unaware of my crimes. Where have you been? Asked Mavis, sipping something that looked far too green to be legal. Oh, just exploring the local transport system, I replied breezily, sitting down and ordering a tea with exactly 6 sugars. I glanced around one last time. No angry men. No police. No camel chase. I had made it. And that, dear friends, is how I borrowed a camel in Egypt, lost my sense of direction, accidentally paid for something I might have already stolen, and lived to tell the tale. Was I a criminal? Possibly. Was I a genius? Absolutely not. But was I a legend? Let's just say, the camel would probably agreed. When I finally got home, I did what every seasoned traveler does after an adventure of questionable legality. I unpacked. Let me tell you, customs had questions. Apparently, a sign that says "Watch for camels" is not considered standard tourist memorabilia. But when I explained that I found it lying on the ground, next to a suspiciously clean hammer and a loosened street pole, they let me go with a warning and a very long note in my travel file. So now, in my living room, right between my knitting basket and the limited edition Queen Elizabeth teacup, hangs that bright yellow diamond-shaped sign with a majestic camel silhouette. It's a conversation starter. Or, as my neighbor Gladys calls it, evidence. The local paper caught wind of my trip thanks to my enthusiastic oversharing at book club, and perhaps a poorly timed Facebook status that read, "Accidentally stole a camel. Long story LOL." And suddenly, I became a legend in my own neighborhood. The mailman now bows when he delivers my post. Teenagers ask me for desert survival tips. One child drew a picture of me on a camel and pinned it to the community bulletin board under the title, "The Desert Bandit Strikes Again." Even my cat Winston looks at me differently now. More respect in his eyes. Or maybe it's hunger. Hard to tell with Winston. But the cherry on top? I was invited to speak at the Women's Travel Club. Me, Margaret Eleanor Goodwin, age 72 and 3/4, keynote speaker. My talk? How to steal a camel and still get tea service. I made a little book to go with it. Self-published, of course. 30 pages of questionable advice, some hand-drawn diagrams, and a whole chapter dedicated to camel-related fashion risks. Spoiler: never wear flowy skirts, unless you want to flash a marketplace. I even got a standing ovation. Although that may have been because I accidentally hit the fire alarm during my closing remarks. Still counts. So what's the moral of the story? Well, that's tricky. You see, most people end their tales with a neat little lesson. Something poetic, meaningful, Instagram-worthy. But me? I think the moral is simple. Always read the fine print, especially when booking camel excursions. Never assume a complimentary mint means you're not being followed. And most importantly, never trust a camel with eyeliner. Because if she bats those lashes at you, next thing you know, you're halfway to Cairo, waving at goats, and trying to bribe a teenager with a juice cart just to get off the ride. But would I do it again? Oh, absolutely. Life's too short to play it safe. Sometimes the best stories come from the worst decisions. So thank you, my dear listeners, for sticking with me through sunburns, sandstorms, smuggled signs, and one very moody camel. And if you enjoyed this little escapade, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stick around. Because I promise, the next tale might just involve a gondola, a suitcase of meatballs, and the Pope's second cousin. But that, my loves, is a story for another day. With mischief and tea. Margaret, your legendary grandma. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, darlings. Smash that like button like it's a mosquito on your teacup. Leave a cheeky comment, I do read them, even the strange ones. And share this video with a friend who could use a laugh or two. More stories, more scandals, and a lot more sass are coming your way. Because with the legendary grandma, the adventure is just getting started.